Hi guys, this is Peugeot 307SW from 2005 and today we're going to replace Driveshaft Center Support bearing. So first of all we need to jack up the car and secure it, and afterwards we will remove the wheel in order to get the access to the locking cap and remove it. So take a look at me doing that, and in the meantime I'm going to tell you a bit more about the video. The bearing that we're going to replace is located on the right drive shaft only, and that's because this car has the steering wheel on the left side and therefore it has the gearbox on the left side of the car as well. So the left drive shaft is quite short and it doesn't need any extra support. On the other hand, the right side is much longer and therefore it requires an intermediate support. So to support rotating shaft we use a bearing. Okay, so now that I've used the hammer to remove the pin, I can freely remove the cap and then I can start working on the nut. But it's better to spray it with lubrication first because this nut is torqued with over 300 Newton meters and therefore it's not easy to remove it. When I've done that, I put the wheel back on, and the arrangement that you see here is the end result of my struggle to remove this nut. I used another jack to lift one side of the lever and then I stood on the other side with my 90 kilos, and then my friend hit the lever with the hammer and only then the nut went loose. So you might have some better tools and that would be great, but I didn't. And by the way, the key size is 36, so it's not something regular to have in the workshop, or at least not for me. Now we can double check that the nut is loose, and if it is, we can start to work on the nuts of the wheel to remove it once more. It's quite a lot of this back and forth with the wheel, but it's just the way to do it. We need to live with that. So when the wheel is off, we can freely remove the nut, and then we can start to focus on two bolts connecting the shock absorber to the spindle. We need to remove them because we will need to relocate the spindle together with the braking disc out of its normal position, and we need to do that because we need place to remove the CV joint from the inside of the spindle. It will take us some time with these bolts, and in the meantime I'm going to tell you additional thing about the video. Along the way during this replacement we will need to drain the transmission oil and refill it afterwards. I have done a detailed video showing how to replace transmission oil on this car, and therefore I will speed these parts up during this video to limit the total length of the video. But if you're interested in details of refilling or draining the oil, I will put this link in the description and at the end of this video, so you have an easy reference to check details about this part. And by the way guys, you can still replace this without buying new transmission oil. You can just reuse your old oil. So make sure to use a proper clean bucket for your oil and then just refill it afterwards. Okay, so now we're at the part where we need to remove the CV joint from the spindle. It can take some time to do that, and what I figured out to be very helpful is when you get into the car and you move the steering wheel one way or another and find the best spot to pull the CV joint out of the spindle. At the beginning you can pull the brake disc towards you and gently hit the face of CV joint with a hammer. By the face I mean the part where the nut used to sit, and that will help you to get the CV joint out of the spindle. And remember that when you pull the brake disc towards you, you need to watch out for the hydraulic cable supplying braking fluid to the caliper, because in an older car it's very easy to break that, so you need to watch out not to increase the time and the cost of repair. When we finally succeed in the struggle to remove the CV joint from the spindle, we still cannot remove the CV axle from the gearbox. And one of the reasons is because the oil level in the gearbox is above the differential, and therefore if we wanted to remove the CV axle, we would get the leak straight on the floor. So before we proceed with the CV axle removal, we need to drain the oil level. As I said, I have already covered that through another video, and therefore I'm going to run through this part really quick and focus on the next step of CV joint replacement. If you'd like more details, just follow the links in the description or the reference I give you at the end of this video. In the short summary, we need to open up the hood, remove part of the airline to get the access to the vent cap on top of the gearbox, remove it, and then go under the car, locate the correct drain plug. We don't want to drain the engine oil, we want to drain the transmission oil. And then prepare big enough bucket for the oil. For this car, 3 liters will be enough. Afterwards, simply remove the drain plug and drain the oil. Now that we have removed the oil from the gearbox, we can start to work on the axle. And as I said, the right axle is different from the left one because the right one is longer and it has an intermediate bearing. So before we can remove the right axle, we need to unlock the bearing because there are 2 locking pins that are keeping the bearing in place. And you need to remove these 2 nuts first in order to unlock the pins. You will find this bearing area in the middle section of the right CV axle. So it's approximately the same distance from the gearbox to the bearing area as it is from the bearing area to the right CV joint. And as you see, it's right next to the drain plug for the engine oil. Now, this perspective that you see here is me having my head right next to the gearbox and looking at the bearing area. Once we have loosened these 2 nuts or removed them completely, as I have done in this video, we need to switch to the other side of the bearing area. So we need to keep our head right next to the CV joint and look at the bearing area. There you will find these 2 locking pins that you need to rotate outwards so they are not blocking the bearing when we will remove the CV axle together with the bearing. Okay, so now we will use this tool and pure force to press the CV axle, or the bearing actually, because it's the bearing that holds the axle in place. So we will use this tool and press the bearing out, and then the rest is easy peasy. So we go under the car, we find the perfect spot, which is in the bearing area on the side of the wheel. And since I've used approx half an hour, not including the brakes, to do that, I'm going to share a bit of how to do that with you. So you don't want to put the lever on the bolt there connected to the rubber part, because you will most likely destroy the rubber part. You want to put it a bit to the left. Parts there are solid and you can get a good grip and good press to pull it out. I haven't registered the final push where I have actually managed to get the bearing out, but I registered the footage just after that. So this is how it looks like. And then it's basically to gently pull the axle out of the gearbox, out of the bearing area and away from the car. Okay, so now in order to remove the bearing, you can use a special tool, which I don't have, and therefore I use conventional tools, which is a hammer with some extension to reach the bearing. And as you will see, the outer ring of the bearing is much more vulnerable, so doing it like that you will most likely destroy the outer ring, but since we're replacing the bearing, that doesn't actually matter. And you can see here that the outer ring has been broken, but now we can remove it and we can get a good access to the locking ring that is securing the bearing in place, and it's really difficult to get the access without removing the outer ring of the bearing. So now on this picture here you can see that I have already hit the locking ring off, and now I'm just hitting the inner part of the bearing of the shaft as well. It takes a bit longer to do it this way, but it's not a whole lot longer, and the advantage is that you don't need any special tools for that, and you can use normal tools that you most likely find in your workshop. So now when you have removed the bearing, it's very important to clean the surface of the shaft where the bearing sits really good, and then it's also a good practice to grease it to make the installation of the new bearing easier. So this is how the new bearing looks like. It's identical to the one we have removed. Well, maybe it's a bit more shiny, but it's the same. Now, before you start installing the new bearing in place, you need to remember that the outer ring is very fragile, and therefore you need to avoid hitting the outer ring, not to destroy the bearing. You need to use the inner ring to apply force and press it in place. So what comes in handy is some extension pipe. In my case it's blue pipe that you see in the video, and then something in between the pipe and the new bearing, just to make sure that you don't destroy the bearing. You can use the inner ring of the old bearing, for example, just at the beginning, because you will need something with slightly larger diameter to press the new bearing all the way to its final location. And then the method is to hit the hammer on the other side of the extension pipe and then slowly force the new bearing in place. When this is done, you do the same with the locking ring. Now, when we've done all that, we can prepare to put the axle back in place. And as part of this preparation, I would recommend to take some sandpaper and clean the area where the bearing sits in, and then grease it. You can also grease the part of the axle that comes in contact with the seal located in the gearbox. And this is also the best time to replace this seal. It costs from $5 to $10, so it's not really a big deal. And it's always better to replace the seal while you're doing the job, because with time the rubber gets harder, older, and then you can have a leak afterwards. So if you're already doing that, you can as well just replace the seal. I'll make another video and show you how to do that, not to make this one too long. When you struggle to put the CV joint back in place, remember that you can always use the steering wheel to position the spindle at the most comfortable angle for you to work on the CV joint. That helped me a lot, and I want to share it with you because that makes a huge difference. When CV joint is finally back in place, we need to reconnect the spindle to the shock absorber. So we need to dig out the two bolts that we've removed, and we need to put them back. Don't also forget about locking the intermediate bearing in place. To do that, you need to rotate the two locking pins back to the original position so that they prevent the bearing from misplacing, and then tighten two nuts that are on the opposite side of the assembly. Next, we need to install the drive shaft retaining nut back in place, put the wheel on, bolt it on, set it on the ground, take an adjustable key size 36 and set it to 325 Nm. Yes, it's quite a lot. And then it's only to tighten the nut. Once this is done, we need to remove the wheel once more. I told you it's a lot of this back and forth with the wheel. And then we can install the locking cap on the nut we have just tightened. Then when the cap is in place, we need to lock it using the locking pin. And then you can also help yourself with the flat screwdriver to get over the parts of the cap where there's groove. At the end, don't forget to tighten your wheel bolts with the correct momentum, and don't forget to fill in your transmission oil. You will not go too far without it. To fill the oil, we use the interface on top of the gearbox. There used to be a vent cap on top, but we have removed it at the beginning of the video. And as I said a few times already, I have a dedicated video on draining and filling in the oil, so please check it out if you're wondering about what oil to fill in, how much. All the details are there. And you can also use the reference at the end of the video, of course. Remember to reinstall the vent cap and the airline at the end. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and if you'd like to see more Peugeot 307 mechanics, check my channel out. I've got plenty of videos about this car, and good luck with your Peugeot.